Welcome to the June 18th meeting of the Planning Commission. I'm Sarah McLeod. I am the clerk, and tonight I will be facilitating the meeting. So first, I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have everyone either here or on video from the PC, so that's great. Susan and Wendy are on video. Okay, and a quick review of the agenda. First, we'll be hearing public comments, then approving the minutes of June 4th. Then we will be continuing our bylaw modernization grant discussion focused on village center zoning. And David, who is here from Sterling Mountain Planning, will be presenting once again. After that, more public comment related to the presentation. So we aim to have that public comment around 8:30. So it will be a pretty robust presentation, which is fun, where there's a lot to talk about. After public comment related to the presentation, we're going to have a brief discussion around the Planning Commission organizing and transition planning, because our very wonderful planner has decided to take another position within town of Jericho, which we're excited about. And also I can only speak for myself. I have mixed feelings because you're doing such a good job. Okay. After that, we're going to talk about events, different liaison updates, and other recent takeaways from recent events, then other business, then wrap up and planning for next meeting, and hopefully adjourn on time at 9 p.m. Does anyone have any reason to suggest a change to the agenda? Hearing none, we will move on. Okay, next on the agenda is public comment. I would like to invite anyone in the room first to make any public comment by stepping up to the microphone. I would like to remind you that everyone universally in public meetings has a 3-minute limit. So I will be watching on my watch.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Jim Carroll. I've been seated 3 minutes by Tom Dowd and William Veve, who can't make it direct to do this presentation.
That's how it works.
Well, you've heard it on the record. Jericho Land Use and Development Regulations, LUDR, effective February 10th, 2022. Please refer to the document that you folks created. Formal request to the Planning Commission to determine how they intend to resolve the incongruity issue described below. The position of the zoning administrator and the DRB is that the least clear component of the LDR is controlling. We asked the PC to, in effect, delay and postpone their long-term theoretical discussions and deal currently on an urgent basis with that which is defeating the goals as defined in the town plan and the supposed intent of the 22 LUDR. We ask for a decision. Does the PC plan to do nothing? Does the PC plan to analyze Scrivener's error, given the facts of the circumstances? Will the Planning Commission go through a rapid deployment project to resolve the incongruity? 2022 LUDR 2, Section 2, General Definitions. The definitions in the LUDR do not include a definition of density, a failing. Dwelling, which is defined, is a building, and Section B speaks to multi-household, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5+. The absence of a definition of process gives rise to greater confusion and misinterpretation. Table of use, page 26, clearly states were multi-household dwellings, 3 or 4 units and 5+ units. In 4.2.22 and 2.2.3 can in fact be employed. Section 4.5 uses structures per lot. Multiple principal structures may be approved in a single lot within a planned development. That section could assist, but it does not. Section 5, dimensional standards, 5.6, density. The error that is very clear to us who sat through the meetings and have talked to the people that were involved is in the simple fact that in the third sentence, it includes the false premise that the only density allowed in Jericho, LUDRs, of the town of Jericho for any calculations is single family and a duplex. It specifically does not mention triplexes, fourplexes, or 5+. A simple error. That is now the position of the zoning administrator and the development review board, since none of the other parties have responded to the above questions. We're here tonight to put it on the record that there was, without any doubt, an error in the documentation. That is now extended into the flawed interpretation that could have gone the other way, that defeats all the improvements anticipated and the number of available units in Jericho of your work that culminated in February of 22.
Jim, you've used your time.
Okay, I just want you to know, this is a constitutional democracy, okay? And this process denies us due process, okay? And so I'm gonna hand this to Linda,
Please do.
and
Thank you.
it's
That-
unbelievable.
Having a written record is very helpful for us because then we can include it
Sure.
online and in our.
I also communicated to quite a few of you well in advance, at least 3 or 4 times. And I'm here tonight because I only got a single acknowledgement of receipt from anybody in town government in the town of Jericho. But I got prompt responses from people outside of Jericho and people not in the line of authority. So the due process is shameful. Don't have to agree, but at least someone can say that they got it.
So to be very clear, with open meeting laws, we are actually not allowed to respond to group emails.
I
So-
disagree. One person can in fact respond in dialogue with someone else because they're not in majority. You can listen and you can say, I got it, okay? I started studying this stuff in 1966. So whoever's giving you this stuff, it's probably making a lot of money and creating a lot of problems and interfering with all the work that you put into the town plan, because it is specifically defeated because of the interpretation of the missing triplex, fourplex, and 5+ in one paragraph in the document.
Planning process, can I make sense?
Yes,
Linda, is this something then you would scan and send back to us as part of, or it goes into the minutes? How does, just so that I understand the process is.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I'll look into it.
That would be really
okay.
helpful. Because it was a lot to process auditorially. I've not
Yes.
read it.
I agree.
So thank you. Thank you, Jim, for bringing it and handing it over.
But it is submitted to the record of the town and planning commission, so it should be available.
Right, I just
Somewhere.
wanted, yeah, just so that I know,
Yes.
Yep.
there was a lot to hear.
Is there any other public comment before we start the discussion around the bylaw modernization grant? No. Anyone online? Are there any hands raised online? No. Okay. I think we're ready to move on to approving the minutes of June 4th. Can I get a motion?
I move we approve the minutes.
Okay, Sabina moves we approve the minutes. Are there any changes or any inaccuracies we need to correct? No.
Do I need to second it?
Yes, please.
I will be happy to second approval.
Thank you. Sorry, I went out of order there. And then can I get a vote to approve the minutes of June 4th? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Susan. Okay, all in favor. All right, the minutes from June 4th are approved, and now we are ready to move on to the bylaw modernization grant presentation.
The slides are printed out on the table over there if anyone wants paper copy.
Thank you.
Good evening. There we go. So, tonight is a continuation of the conversation we've had the last several meetings about various pieces and steps through the process of revising the town zoning regulations, specifically as they relate to the village centers and the village center district and the character-based zoning for Riverside. So tonight, I'm going to kind of wrap up this overview of all the different parts and kind of high-level conversation about proposed changes. I'll come back in another month and a half or something like that with more details on, okay, so these are the things that were changed and how they were changed based on these conversations. So there'll be a bit of a break, and then you'll really see the weeds for the forest. Tonight, kind of three parts of this conversation, and I put together these slides with two audiences in mind. One, of course, is you and the folks who are here at the meeting, and perhaps even, choosing to watch the video at some other later time. But they also, because they're getting posted separately, somebody can go and pick and download it and look through it. So in some of these slides, there's more words in conversation that perhaps you need to get into, but it's important to kind of get it out there so that folks who maybe haven't followed as closely as you have can keep up. So tonight's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about an overview of what I see as being the development potential in the three different village centers in Jericho. We're going to discuss regulating land uses and some of the proposed changes to the use table that you all saw over the course of the last couple of weeks. And then a kind of a high level summary of the scope of changes that are being anticipated.
And in terms of process, while David's going through the slides, since we weren't able to get this to you all ahead of time, it's going to be iterative. So ask questions, provide comments back to David as we go through the slides.
Yep.
Okay, I was gonna ask you that. That's very helpful.
Yep, great. So just at a high level and thinking about these three village areas that are shown here on the map, Riverside, Jericho Corners, and Jericho Center. All three of these parts of town share very similar development patterns and development characteristics. The building, the types of buildings, the scales, the lot and building patterns are all pretty similar. And that means that many of the dimensional standards that work for one are likely going to work quite well for any of the others. So that's really helpful in thinking about how changes to the regulations get organized. Particular attention needs to distinguish how parcels and buildings are treated along busier roads, higher traffic areas versus lower traffic areas. And that's where the greatest difference between these three areas come into play. All three of them have a variety of physical constraints, wetlands, floodplains, just an existing development pattern in buildings that are, in most cases, foreclose any large scale new development projects. So we'll specifically focus on Riverside here because this is the one place that is already part of a conversation in looking at new development opportunity. There is public infrastructure in the form of water that's already here, wastewater that's planned. It's on an existing regional transportation transit route with commuter transit in place as part of its Green Mountain Transit's network. And it's on a busy state highway. So there are a lot of factors that kind of make this area particularly attractive for new development, expansions to existing buildings, redevelopment of existing buildings, and then particularly for larger scale, and I don't mean in terms of big buildings, but multiple buildings on the former Green Crow site. And this is something we've been anticipating, we've been talking about for a number of years. The development of that area in kind of that triangle of Route 15, River Road, and Park Street, in itself will be a catalyst to drive further development, interests and opportunities in other properties along Route 15 and within walking distance of this area. So there's one area we know well about that's a huge opportunity for some significant new development, and that will drive development opportunity and particularly infill opportunity in other parts of this district.
Sorry, what's
Yeah.
the red, the difference between the red and the blue?
So the difference between the red and the blue. You can see my cursor.
Purple.
Can we turn off the light just for this part of the
Yeah.
presentation?
I'm not
Oh,
sure
yeah,
how.
you're right, there's purple too.
Yep, so
That's a
Oh,
little-
that is better.
here we are.
Good suggestion.
So the dark blue here, that is what we've discussed as the proposed Riverside Village Center District. That is a combination of the existing CD4 and portions of CD3. The lighter color blue is wetland, floodplain, development constraints that sandwich this area. The red then is what we refer to as the Riverside
Village neighborhood.
Village Neighborhood District, which is currently Village Center District.
Thank you.
Mhm. So this is Jericho Corners, the part of town that we're in now. Again, same colors, just without that deeper blue. The existing Village Center district, and then showing particularly lands constrained by flood and wetland potential. So not a lot of opportunity for any major redevelopment sites here. It does have infrastructure in terms of water. It does have access to a state highway. It does have commuter transit regularly scheduled running through the middle of it, which are all things that are going to fuel new development potential. So the greatest opportunities here are in the adaptation, expansion, and redevelopment of existing buildings into mixed use and or multi-unit, as well as infill of new buildings, you know, next to, behind, taking advantage of what is characteristic in all three of these village areas. Lots of, in some cases are pretty wide, but in a lot of cases are really deep. And there's an opportunity to do something in the back if we can figure out how to make sure that the regulations facilitate that. We'll talk about more of that in a minute. And then finally, Jericho Center. Again, same color patterns here. What's different here, of course, is a complete lack of public infrastructure. There's no water. There could be wastewater depending on the outcome of the study. Brown's Trace is a busy road, but it's not it's a major highway like Vermont 15. No transit system. So the opportunities and the things that drive new development here are very different and much more limited. That said, there are a lot of pretty deep lots and wider lots that again create the opportunity for infill development, as well as we talked about this last week, as well as the parcel off of Plains Road, owned by the fire department. That is in the kind of in the top of the picture there. That is a fairly large greenfield site that could be redeveloped into some significant housing opportunity, should the opportunity present itself, and most importantly, that the regulations enable it. Excuse me. So just briefly, what does infill look like? Because when we talk about new development, everybody has a different picture in their head. And for half of the folks thinking about this, it's really scary. And for the other half, it's not. But I want to put some common images in people's mind about what infill development typically looks like in Vermont, or in places that have characteristics that look like Vermont. So these are some examples of some infill residential development in Morrisville, in Burlington, in Freeport, Maine, and White Center, Washington. This is all duplex, townhouses, or other multifamily units that are attached in various forms. But you know, this is the kind of thing that you can see where in some cases it's obvious where a new building has been dropped into an existing pattern, in other cases not so much, and That's kind of the goal, is at the end of the day, if you didn't see it happen and you maybe didn't know what it looked like beforehand, you wouldn't know that that new building was a new building. And in the form of non-residential development, these are some examples from Stowe, Richmond, and Issaquah, Washington, of new infill. Again, same idea, but a scale that can fit in parts of Jericho. Probably, you know, a larger mixed-use building, you're not gonna see that in Jericho center. There's not the economy to make that happen, but in Riverside, sure, why not? And one more thing here, when we talk about infill on larger lots, what could that mean? And this is a totally conceptual illustration of what might that mean, but it's adding new buildings, adding new lots, next to, behind existing buildings that are all in a similar scale and of a similar pattern. So in this image, the orange buildings are new. The gray buildings are existing. And you can see that just in this one little snapshot, that if you can unlock the opportunity created in some of the larger lots, and particularly some of the deeper lots, you could get a fair amount of, you know, there may be single family homes, they may be ADUs, they may be accessory buildings that are converted to another unit or two. There's a variety of different forms that might take, but you can see there's a lot of opportunity here that doesn't disrupt the pattern and doesn't disrupt the scale that pre-exists on the ground.
David, is this
Yeah.
based on the current zoning?
It's
Lot
not,
size?
this is a seat of the pants
Okay,
exercise of, okay,
Yeah.
here's a box of a similar size.
Yep.
Drop
So
it,
you got out your
Drop it.
Legos
yes,
and you
okay.
put them on there,
here's some spaces,
totally arbitrary.
completely.
No landowner in this space
Nope.
should think that anything is being suggested. It is only for the purposes of illustration.
It's only for the purposes of illustration, absolutely.
Not
I
vetted.
tried to take into account the fact that, oh, there's not a huge bank here that you can't put a building on,
Right.
that, you know, the slopes kind of work. You know, it's not wetland, or floodplain, but, you know, you could conceptually plot a building here. And one of the things that definitely doesn't take into account is whether or not, on the existing parameters, on-site wastewater,
Well,
could ever work,
That would be the issue.
right? Absolutely,
Right.
Yes,
absolutely. But with a community system, it might, but it still may not. So that's why it's important to, you know,
just,
flag and double flag. This is conceptual for illustration purposes only. So now let's talk about land use. So,
Before- David, if I could just real
Yep,
quick before
absolutely.
you go in. Heidi, you had sent me an email, but there wasn't an attachment on it. So
Yes.
if there was something that you wanted to say, you and Chris worked on this, please talk about
Sure.
it during this part
Okay.
of the presentation.
You should check, because I tried 2 more times before I.
You did, okay, maybe I just haven't been to my
Yes.
email since.
No,
earlier
I
today.
apologize. I technical. So yes,
Okay,
all right, is that with regard to uses?
it was the
Yes,
uses
or-
table for.
yes, she was
Okay.
trying to send it to me, but the attachment didn't come through, so I don't know what the comments were.
Okay, so the first 3 slides here are about regulating land uses in general, and then we'll get into some of our more specific recommendations on the use table. So best practices around land use, regulating use within a zoning ordinance. The first one is organizing uses within generic categories. Amongst a variety of different uses that all share common characteristics. So rather than regulating a bakery and a hardware store and a grocery store and a toy store all separately, you regulate them as retail. And then when there are uses, specific uses within that broader category that maybe have specific needs, or maybe have specific concerns, and the example I'll use is grocery store. The need of a grocery store is that it needs to have a much bigger footprint than your toy store. So it comes with kind of certain characteristics and parameters that you at least need to have an awareness of and anticipate. But by using generic categories, it gives you greater flexibility when uses that you hadn't thought of, never conceived of being something you might see in Jericho, come to the fore, and you're looking for a place to make it fit. It makes the regulations much more flexible, and be able to accommodate those emerging uses.
So if that's the best practice, how do you feel like the current table of uses adheres to the best practice concept or not?
Yes and no. There are some cases where there's a degree of specificity that I don't understand why there is.
Well, I was gonna say, it strikes me as much more complex than
Mhm.
what you're
Yes.
describing as the
Agreed.
ideal.
Yeah.
generic.
Exactly. You know, so in its simplest form, you could have residential, retail, office, manufacturing, recreation, boom, you're done. But we all know within some of those categories, then there are, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Well, there's some uses that involve sales that are very land intensive. Garden centers, lumber yards, auto dealerships, things like that. They have a lot of outdoor storage needs. And it might be something that you want to, then in taking on the next bullets, make sure that each use fits within the intended purpose and characteristics of the district that you're putting it in, and create use-specific standards where necessary. So if you're looking at accommodating, let's say, automobile sales in Riverside, well, you're going to want to put a box around that in terms of how big it could be. You're not going to have acres, you're not going to get, and you're not going to try to accommodate, a large dealership, but a small, probably used cars that has, some vehicles on the lot for sale. You're going to want to regulate where those vehicles are actually stored relative to the buildings. There's some things that maybe you want to touch the nuances on.
Because, and when you say that, you're thinking that because we would rather have housing and mixed use in Riverside than, because, take Greg Tatro, for example, who owns a lot of the land. I mean, you could do a car dealership there. I mean, there's room for it. But you're saying that we don't necessarily want to allow that because it's not what we think is the best and highest use for that land.
So it's a combination of, you don't want something that requires a lot of outdoor storage. As I said, you want to regulate how that outdoor storage, where it's located and how it manifests itself.
Well, I'm asking you why we want to regulate it.
But then you may want to put bounds on its overall size in order to fit within one of these places. And you don't want, if you were to say, yeah, we don't care, we want an auto dealership, or we want another lumber yard there, you'd prefer that more of that land be dedicated to other productive uses. So again, based on scale and how it fits within that neighborhood, if you're going to allow it, you're going to constrain its physical footprint. And particularly when you're dealing with a form-based code, it's easier because you have building standards that may regulate, well, one of my favorite examples is a gas station. You know, so in regulating fuel service in downtown Burlington, with our form code, we allowed it. Why not? If you can meet the building standards, you can do it. You want to have an auto dealership, again, if you can meet the building standards, because we don't allow for outdoor storage and display, why not? There are a lot of dealerships where the cars are all inside, what handful that they have,
I like the one with the elevator and then.
Yeah.
like, stack-
you know? They tend to be Lexus dealers, but you know, still.
Can I interrupt you?
Mhm.
Just one more question, and this may be as much to you as it is to my fellow PC planners. I have to say, I also imagine that part of the best use conversation also fit with the goals of the town plan.
Mhm.
So the goals of the town plan are first and foremost to create density for increased spectrum of housing affordability across the spectrum. Enabling certain economic development, preservation of our wetlands and caution there, and creating connectivity for walking and ped.
Mhm.
Those are all additional criteria, are they not, that we are intermixing with best use? That, I mean, didn't we say, what I'm having a hard time is to align the best use with the core values and what we said we wanted in terms of growth and change over time. So I'm trying to like make sure that we're holding both in mind
Mhm.
when we're looking at best use, but I just want to make sure
So,
that's true.
so when this conversation about use is purely in the use table, what uses are allowed within this district? When it comes to how do we encourage more walking and biking, how do we protect wetlands? There are other tools in the zoning ordinance that address those issues more directly.
Okay, but housing density would still be one that's about best use in these areas, right?
So yes, that you're
Okay.
going to allow for a variety of residential use types.
Okay,
And then in your development standards, which we talked about in some of the previous meetings, that's where you get into how many units, what's the density, you know, what's the intensity of development that's allowed here. So how many units can you get on a site?
I'm gonna be a pain in the ass,
No,
then,
no,
so just
not at all.
like, just know it from the start, because I mean, I'll just be honest, that and I think about it like,
Yeah.
what do I wanna see? I wanna see what we heard from the town and what people said we want, which is an increased diversity of housing for all incomes and abilities. And so that's what I'm gonna lead with when I look at what do I want in certain
Yeah,
areas,
so
right?
just
So-
to throw it out there,
Yeah,
I think when we talk about uses, we're talking about in this area, it is not currently permitted, and I don't think that's being requested to change it. There's not an agricultural specific use.
right,
And there's not heavy manufacturing.
Right.
Those are not allowed uses in this space. So
Yeah, I think-
we're just talking about how to simplify the table of uses
totally. I get that.
and then let the rest of the zoning talk about, like, yes, you could have a car dealership, but it has to fit these parameters, so that,
If you say,
right,
we
yeah.
think that could work as long as all these other boxes get checked.
Yeah,
So-
although hypothetically, I could say, I don't think that's gonna work, and I'm gonna make it super hard for anybody to do anything other than housing. I mean, I could play that.
You could play that, and
Okay.
then the other counter to that then becomes, well, at some point that housing needs services
Sure.
to support it, but
Yeah.
it still may say, yeah, but auto sales is probably not a.
All right,
Right.
I just, again, I just wanna make sure that I'm approaching the exercise with the right sort of what is my responsibility as a member of the planning commission and one of the authors and pushers of the plan, that we're, you know, making, that we're in sync, that the zoning actually is following what we said we were trying
Yeah,
to do.
and ultimately, I suspect a lot of those light bulbs won't go on until you see all the pieces
Yeah,
put together, because right
exactly.
now they're.
Right, so for to me, it's like,
Different.
how is that a different
Yes.
part of it? And so I just really want to make sure that I got my head on.
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
thank you.
absolutely. There's no crazy questions. If you have a question, guaranteed there's plenty other people that have the same
Okay.
question.
Alright.
So the last one here is in trying to include newer and more and emerging uses. And these are just some examples, and some examples that we've talked about with regard to Jericho, like commercial kitchens, specialty food and beverage, emergency shelters, artisan manufacturing. These are things that we're seeing more and more of, folks wanting to be able to do. So how do we incorporate that in a better way into our existing regulations? So when we're thinking about, again, breaking down these land uses or putting them together, we think about in terms of both physical space and their activity level. How does one use manifest itself differently or similarly from another? It may be in terms of its physical size, but most often it has to do with what happens there. So they're all going to be places where people live, work, shop, gather, and play. Some places are private, like where we live, and other places are public. Some places welcome visitors all the time, like retail, right? Customers come and go at any given time. Other businesses at regular intervals, when you schedule appointment to go to the doctor or to get your hair cut or get a massage or whatever that may be, those personal services, they come on some prescribed timeline. And sometimes never. Sometimes visitors just aren't a part of the equation. Some have larger needs for deliveries and shipping and storage. Some require the use of specialized equipment, materials and processes, some of which create offsite impacts that you want to be sure that you're capturing to the extent to which it fits within regulating your land uses and development, as opposed to regulations that some other governmental agency may already have in place. And some, based on their size or in their nature, are more likely to create those offsite impacts. So when we think about manufacturing, well, you can have your Jolly Green Giant pea plant, that has got all kinds of truck traffic coming in and out, and is a large industrial user, or you can have that more artisanal scale of, somebody who's working with 3 other people in a barn on their property, and they're making furniture, or they're, what were some of the examples you had, Eric, of 3D printing, and
3D printing, yeah.
who knows what they're making? It doesn't really matter what they're making. It's how are they making it, and how does that activity manifest itself? And then what's it like or different from in other uses? Permitted versus conditional uses. So permitted uses are uses that are allowed by right. If you can meet all of the requirements of the ordinance, whether they are dimensional standards or any specific use related requirements, that use gets a permit from the administrative officer within 30 days under Vermont law. So these are generally uses that are pretty well known to us, and the impacts are pretty well known. Again, these are things like retail. These are things like most residential uses. There again can be things like home occupations where, at what point does a home occupation not really look and feel like a home occupation anymore? So that's where you create these more use specific standards around that particular activity in order to constrain, how big it might get. Conditional uses are uses that may require greater sensitivity or have a greater potential for those offsite impacts. Something that is a conditional use is required to be reviewed by the Development Review Board, reviewed and approved by the Development Review Board, based on a criteria of not having or not resulting in undue adverse effect on the surrounding area regarding these 4 items in your existing ordinance. So capacity of public infrastructure and facilities, the character of the area as it's defined in the zoning ordinance. So I'll just make the point here that this concept of character of the area criteria is one that gets beaten up by a lot of people, and very rightly so. But in your ordinance, as it should, it specifies what the character of the area is, or what you mean by the use of that term, by pointing the reader to the definition of the zoning district and what does the town plan say about it. It's not just what, anybody, is going to say that the character is. Traffic and utilization of natural resources or renewable energy resources.
David, before you move on,
Mhm.
two things. One, in our table of uses, there was also an E.
Yeah,
Are you gonna talk about that?
I am.
Okay,
No,
all right, then we can wait on it.
And what about C3?
and then there's like C
Yeah,
one
there
and
are a few other
C
things,
three.
so when we get there, you'll
Yeah.
just go over this.
Yeah,
Okay, and then do I remember that part of our charge, based on what we heard through the public engagement and development of the plan, was a desire for us to the extent that we are able to limit the number of conditional uses by having it be more clear, because that's where we get in the swirl when we're trying to develop. But to the extent that we can be super clear about what's permitted and what's not, and have fewer things in the conditional swirl, that will help move us forward.
it will indeed. So so again, yes, the idea of reducing the number of uses that are required to go through a conditional use review.
Okay.
And you can do that by, just making them a permitted use, or by making it a permitted use with specific requirements.
Okay.
So, if you were to think about a particular use and go, well, if I were on the DRB, these are the three things I'd be concerned about, or that, the three conditions that I would think most logically would fit. Again, I'll go back to home occupations. How many employees are there? Or, what percentage of the household? So if you can put those parameters right into the ordinance to define whether or not it can be a permitted use or not, then there's no reason that the Development Review Board has to spend time with it, because you've essentially taken away any of their discretion. So you're kind of wasting their time and energy by laying those things up front. You made it very clear to the applicant, okay, I have to fit within this box and I can do that. And the zoning administrator knows what those things are and they can just carry it forward. That's a big-
Susan has a question.
Actually, David just kind of answered the question, but so when you just showed on the previous slide a list of criteria that might apply to in a conditional use situation, that those are examples. That's not like an all-inclusive list, right?
This is the list that is currently in the Jericho regulations. These are the standards that the DRB applies to a condition.
So like when you were talking earlier about something like retail, and you were like, okay, a grocery store and a toy store. And I was thinking like, I really liked actually the way that you suggested that we think about common characteristics, because a toy store might generally close at 6 p.m. And so it could fit in a lot of areas that are otherwise pretty residential, whereas grocery stores sometimes are 24 hours or they're open till 11 p.m. and that's a big difference. So not just the size, but hours of operation. And so I was thinking just now when you were looking at permitted versus conditional would be things like hours, or like you just mentioned, number of employees or amount of parking or how big the building is. So it's less about the use and more about the impact. But I guess what you're saying is that if the ordinance says, look, if you close by 6 p.m., then retail can be permitted. It doesn't even have to be conditional. Like, so I was thinking about hours and parking and noise and other kinds of impacts, wondering if they would be also in conditional. But so I'm thinking that my question is, you just kind of answered it, that we would try to think about things that would interfere make uses otherwise incompatible. It doesn't necessarily have to be the use itself. It's how that use drives other factors.
No, that's exactly right. You know, it's not the use itself, it's, you know, how does it manifest itself and, you know, what impacts might be created. And then if you can anticipate what they are and what boundaries you can reasonably place on those things, like hours of operation.
Right.
You can then make it permitted.
But even
Yeah.
like you were talking earlier about like car dealers, and you know, there's car dealers in the middle of New York City in these small showrooms, and they have one car. And
Mhm.
Tesla sales, they don't have lots or anything either. So even our thinking, you know, we think about things based on like these very traditional models, but as business models evolve, even a car sale, we have to think differently about what a car dealer requires. And as long as it's the space and the hours and they're not interfering with a walkable neighborhood and they're not consuming too much land, then maybe that would be perfectly fine.
So with the uses, as you think about them, you know, you want to ask yourself the question, well, how could this fit in one place or another? You know, are there boundaries that you can place on it? Are there parameters around, well, with walkability being an example, well, you've got building placement requirements that say that, you know, when you place a new building on a site, it needs to be in a certain general location, and the outdoor storage happens behind it. That's fine, that could work. You know, overall size limits, all those kinds of things. So if you can answer those questions, then you're in a better position to anticipate, well, you know, yeah, there's car dealers that maybe have one model in the building and everything else is online. Because they only have 2 or 3 models. Some of the smaller ones, so that's exactly right. So moving on to the kind of the high level look at the changes in the use table that we're beginning to think about. First simple thing is you've got a use table in the conventional zoning and you've got a use table in the character-based zoning. There's really no reason to have 2. You can easily have 1. And that makes it a little simpler that you've got all the same uses. One of the other things that I didn't say about best practices is that every use needs a definition. Pretty sure that all of the uses in your use table have a definition, and there's a bunch of uses in your definitions that aren't in the use table. So I'm not sure what that's about, but that, you know. So have one table of uses. I'll say the same thing, have one table of parking standards. You know, your character-based zoning, one of the things we talked about that is that it needs to be really clear about what parts of the conventional zoning still apply. So it can very easily point back to table of uses, the parking requirements, the adoption procedures, the application for a permit process, all of those things, it should be reside in one place.
Are you, I'm just thinking we're, you know, in this world of rapid evolving technology, and I'm trying to imagine how I could even imagine what uses would be, or somebody's new definition of a car dealership, for example. And then I'm trying to relate that to the idea of simplifying the table of uses. Are you going to suggest a modified table of uses that would be more in line of your sort of best practices?
So what I'm gonna attempt to do is to reorganize it and to consolidate, and you just kind of saw that in the recommendations on the use table, is consolidate these 2 or 3 things into one. There really is no reason for there to be a difference, and I'll talk about this in some of these examples. So kind of jumping to that of there's like 3 or 4 different senior senior housing, assisted living,
Mhm.
you know, other kinds of elderly care functions in the ordinance. Many of them, a couple of them are duplicative, many of them are quite overlapping. You need to have a really clear continuum of something that is completely independent living, you know, age-restricted independent living, if that's where you want to go. And then you transition through assisted, ultimately getting to skilled nursing care, you know? So you've got that continuum. And one of the examples in your use table, and I forget what it's called now, but it's a bridge across several of those things. I kind of think of it as the Wake Robin example, where within this thing, there, you know, are all of these stepping stones together in one place. But you're not going to see a lot of that without a fairly large site. So you want to accommodate the individual pieces where they make sense too. But you need to kind of line them up and consolidate them wherever possible.
It feels a little bit to me like the current table of uses in our town is the underlying premise is one of restriction
Mhm.
rather than acceptance or encouragement or, you know, fostering development. And I guess I wonder, as we are trying to push for new development of all kinds, if we would want to, if that would be part of reimagining the table of uses, is that it's not so much about what you can't do, but more positive.
I just wrote down the same question to myself, like, is our goal to rule things in or to rule them out? And it definitely seems like the table of uses right now feels like a rule it out situation.
So from my perspective and philosophy, it's definitely, how do we make this happen?
So that's a rule in.
How do we rule this in? How do we make this happen? We don't need to say other things that we don't ever want to have happen here. We don't need to say, ooh, nuclear power plants. We don't want that in Jericho. You know, that's kind of pointless, but what do we want? And how can I convey to you, an applicant, the best path forward in order to getting that thing done? So how do we make this happen? Bounce back up here to Ag and Forestry, because Heidi, you asked the question about the E's. So the E stands for, is it?
Exemption.
So,
But
but
we've had a follow-up conversation where,
in the current ordinance, I think it's an A for allowed.
yes.
Oh, yes, that was.
And
there
my
in
recommendation
certain
is,
places, too.
where appropriate, it should be exempt. What's allowed mean?
Well, what is the difference between allowed and permitted?
Yeah,
Exactly.
it was very confusing.
You know, I'll say common zoning language is it's permitted use, it's a conditional use, you know, from there. So, or it's exempt from zoning. So there are things in your use table that municipalities don't have the power to regulate. Agricultural and silvicultural practices are specifically exempt from zoning, as are some accessory farm uses. These are things that are defined either in statute or in rulemaking by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Markets. So we can reference those things to highlight the fact that these things are exempt. We want them to happen here. We encourage them to happen here. They're exempt from requiring a permit to establish that use.
But I thought that
Yeah.
was the difference between exempt and permitted and allowed, that they were actually different. That exempt is truly exempt from zoning. Allowed doesn't require a permit, but it still needs to comply with the regulations. You know, you can't be whatever close to the wetland, you can't do this, you can't do that, but you don't need a zoning permit. But if for some reason you were in a violation of one of the regulations, that's what allowed is like comply, but you don't need a permit. And then permitted is you need a permit, but the zoning administrator can provide that to you. And conditional use is you need a permit and the DRB needs to approve it.
But I think what I'm arguing is I don't see a point in having things that are allowed you don't need a permit for this. Some of those things are passive recreation. You don't need to say that a property owner has the ability to, you know, have a walking trail on their property and enjoy passive outdoor recreation. That seems kind of overkill to me.
It does, but except that the Jericho regulations are written currently such that if a use is not specifically allowed or permitted or exempt, that then the default is that it's not allowed. So kind of like what Heidi was saying, ruling in versus ruling out. So if you wanted to have it be that way, then that overarching default position would need to be changed. Which, you know, we inherited. I don't know how long it's been there, but that's how I believe it's currently structured.
But
That's why I think,
Go ahead.
well, I think
I-
that's why there's uses that are in the table and you're like, why are they in there? Specifically so that they are enabled, because if it's not in there, Jericho says it's not allowed.
But Susan, you're saying we inherited it, but we could change it.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay.
And for some of those things too, is that maybe I should have put together a slide that kind of explains this distinction, is that you have principal uses and you have accessory uses. So me having walking trails on my property for my own personal enjoyment and anybody else that I may invite to come walk in them, you know, that's accessory to the principal residential use. It's subordinate and customarily associated with that kind of activity. So again, those things you don't need to specify all the possibilities of what they are, would be my point. But that's something that we should be sure that we don't get tripped up in as we work through the use table.
I think one of the areas there that comes up is that right now in the outdoor recreation accessory use, structures are allowed. So that's the penny castle or the slide set you built for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's saying you can do that without a permit or anything. And it makes sense in a way that we would want to at least know it's there. So that's why you might say, you know, where is this structure? What's involved with it? But also makes sense. So we wouldn't want to tell a landowner, no, you can't build a swing set for your kids.
Correct. So you simply have a list of things that are exempt from being required to get a permit. It's not a separate use in and of itself. You know, that swing set, again, in my backyard, or you know, or a shed under a certain size, you don't need a permit for this. You don't need a permit for you know, everyday maintenance or repair of your building. That's very common practice. So you have a list of what things are exempt from zoning. And you'd be sure to include them there. But they're not separate
Well,
uses.
at the same time, wouldn't we want to know that such a structure is there?
No,
I don't care if you have a swing set.
exactly.
Well,
Well, you always give us, I mean,
Right.
we're not gonna regulate it.
But I would say, so if I'm following this conversation, one takeaway is we want on the table the conversation, if not now, some other time. But whether we need to continue what we inherited, which was a category called allowed.
Mhm.
Right, that's the question that we're pushing up against, and do we collectively, right, David, as our implementer, right, but it's us to decide, do we collectively want to change the default assumption to a rule in versus rule out? To a, we need to know versus do what you want, as long as we're assuming that, you know, what you're doing is gonna comply with regulations. Right, if there's such a thing.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and therefore the allowed, this goes away.
Yes, I understand that. The question comes up into issues, again, I'll just pick on a play structure
Oh,
because
please.
we all had one in our backyard at the same time. How big is too big?
Yeah, and I'm not saying.
That's where we say it's allowed.
It's not, but it's not a permanent structure,
Yeah,
so it's not,
Have you ever taken down a play structure once it's been out for 10 years?
I have.
But then somebody else wants a hockey rink and they want lights on till 11 o'clock at night so people can play hockey at night. And then somebody else wants to do a zip line course And then and then a structure is a parking lot, and now I need a parking lot for 5 or 8 cars in my little neighborhood to take advantage. I mean, I'm not advocating one or the other. I'm just saying you have to be careful because it goes on and on and on and on, and there's a lot of gray areas there that it seems so straightforward when you talk about it as a walking path, and you can suddenly get yourself into a rabbit hole.
Right.
Yeah.
But then it's just to play this one out, and I'm sorry, David, because we do want you to go back to yours. But to play this out, we could say there's a noise ordinance in town. After certain hours, we have a noise ordinance, or we have light ordinances, or whatever it is. I'm making stuff up.
Mhm.
But we could have those as opposed to what you can do on your own land individually, which is we say for the society as a whole, you do what you want on your land as long as you follow what we as collectively have decided is important to us as a community, which is after 11 o'clock at night, it's quiet. After a certain hour, it's, you know, it's the stars and it's not streetlights or something, you know, so it could be, we could come at it from a different angle, I guess is what I'm saying, and still preserve the right of the individual landowner to do what they want with us being all in their business,
And you can do that, again, go back to the play structure.
right?
You can say, play structures are exempt, provided they don't encroach into a
But that's
setback.
the opposite. That's not what exempt means. Exempt means you're exempt. It doesn't apply to you. You have carte blanche versus allowed, which is you can do it, but you have to follow the rules.
Agriculture is different.
exempt.
It's exempt under state law.
Right, but
Right.
that's the definition. So if you say it's a play structure is exempt, it does not have to adhere to the setbacks. I can put my hockey rink right up next to the edge of my neighbor's pond in that.
Right.
scenario.
Exactly.
So I think we're getting a little off track.
Yeah,
And a
I'm
lot of
sorry.
hypotheticals.
Yeah. I'm
And-
just trying to understand the points that we're going
Yes.
for. So thank you,
Yes.
Sarah. I'm sorry.
But I want to focus on the meat
Okay,
of this, which is bylaw modernization.
and particularly principal uses,
Yes.
right? Principal uses. So, we talked about these are, ag and forestry, specifically understanding boundaries around accessory farm uses. These are things that, the farm stand becomes a wedding venue and all kinds of other activities. At what point have you crossed the line that it's no longer accessory to a protected agricultural use and it's become something else? That's where then your regulations would want to step in and say, yes, that's something that we want to say yes to, or that's something that we want to say yes to, but.
Where does anyone who wants to provide housing for farm workers fit into that?
So that would fit under, you actually have a category of residential accessory to a farm that you treat differently. And that's a perfectly suitable place where you're specifically saying that, if it's part of a agricultural operation that meets that state's definition, that you're going to allow for, residential units to be associated with it, in addition to or beyond what other housing density limits might be.
So you're saying it's accounted for already?
Yeah.
Right.
It's in there as permitted use.
Yep.
Yes, it's a.
Yep.
But that's where it switches from exempt to permit.
Yes.
So using our category.
Right, because that
Right.
aspect of it, that aspect of the agricultural practice exemption, it's well beyond that. But we recognize that it's a really important part of the viability of agriculture, and if there's a way that we can help, that's a way we can help. So these are just some thoughts around non-residential uses. And if it helps, I can put up the use table that we shared and we can walk through some of those things, but I'll just try to summarize them here. Adding things like, and some of these may get a little too far afield, as we talked about the villages, but it's just the process of an act of imagination. as I start looking at these. Campgrounds, public assembly and event space. Yeah, there's some places in the use table where you might squeeze that, but I think you might want to be more explicit about what it is and perhaps put some parameters around how it operates. Health and wellness studio, in my mind, that is a smaller version of, it is a professional services, personal services kind of use. Could fit in that category generically. Today, it maybe fits under gymnasium, but it's not what most people think of when they think of it as a gymnasium. Food and beverage processing is a big one that is really popular in Vermont. Really important to the Vermont economy and the Jericho economy, where I think you want to be explicit about where and when and how you want to facilitate that kind of activity. Same with commercial kitchens. Self-storage, I didn't see anything in there that spoke specifically to self-storage, which, is kind of one of those necessary evils for a lot of people, a lot of communities, and it's useful to have some parameters around it. Again, it may or may not fit within the villages that we're talking about, but I've added to the list. Senior centers, different than senior housing, and the artisanal scale of manufacturing. Changing to the size thresholds for things like retail, restaurant, galleries, and museums. I think currently your threshold is like 3,000 square feet, plus or minus, before it becomes conditional versus permitted. Bless you.
Well, wasn't it, it was 3,000 as the threshold in the village centers, but it was 6,000 as the threshold in the Riverside
in the
code.
character-based zoning, so make it all consistent,
Yeah,
and I think
consistent.
6,000 is something that makes sense. And just as a point of reference, when you're thinking about 6,000 square feet, what's that? Deborah Wasson Memorial Library is about 6,000 square feet.
Before you move on from the slide, David, I know this is labeled as a non-residential use, but one of the examples you brought up earlier that when Chris and I were going through this distinct ones was exactly what you said, which is there all these distinctions made about different kinds of senior housing that are when there's a combination of housing and services.
Yes.
Right, so are we gonna talk about that somewhere else? Because honestly, I was super confused about why we care. I mean, I love senior housing and I love the fact that we are going to need graduated care and different types of care for all of us as we age. But why there was a distinction needed at all? Is there?
I love that question. Why do we care?
Why do we care?
And I think that's, in addition to how do we make this happen? Maybe we start with why do we care when we go through the list of uses.
Okay, all right.
And what I'm gonna kind of start with in the next iteration is I'm gonna try to reorganize this and put them together. And then I'm gonna kind of come back to you with, okay, tell me why we care.
Okay.
Maybe we do, maybe we don't. And then how do we make this happen?
Okay.
Because I think if it's age restricted, independent living, and then there is some assistance where there's some services that are provided in one form or another, how does that manifest itself differently on the ground? I'll go back. Does it manifest itself differently on the ground in a way that we care about?
Okay.
Or
but-
matters,
yeah.
we care, but
So, yeah, I'm
matters.
just wondering, it was curious to me right now, because it's in that zone between residential and non-residential use, and it wasn't on your list, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that it was something that
Yes.
you're.
It was actually a part of this continuum of
Okay,
understanding senior, senior living
beautiful,
configurations.
beautiful. Okay, thank you.
You've got personal professional services in two different type categories, type 1 and type 2. And it all is about a perception of the extent to which these different uses use toxic chemicals or not. Well, there are specific regulations either through labor and industry or EPA or any number of other state and federal organizations that deal with toxic chemicals, how they're handled, when they're used, when, by whom, all of those kinds of things that is well beyond kind of your scope and interest from a zoning perspective. If you're regulating personal and professional services, again, it's how does it manifest itself? Levels of traffic, physical footprint, storage needs, all of those kinds of things. And I think those distinctions can be eliminated and you just group them all together. Again, your hairdresser, I think one of the examples was the hairdresser was type 1, assuming that there are no chemicals involved. I don't think so. Excuse me. I don't think so. But a photo studio was in type 2, assuming that lots of chemicals were involved. Well, a photo studio is where they take the pictures. It's not where they process the pictures, which uses chemicals. But again, that's not something that I think Jericho's in a position to directly regulate. You don't have the capacity and the staff to do that. Right, Linda?
Yeah. we don't care.
A recommendation to combine things like garden centers, lumber yards, auto sales, all of those kinds of things that require lots of outdoor display into one category. Again, they use a lot of land, but otherwise they kind of manifest themselves fairly similarly, and you can put parameters around what that is and how that works. Financial institutions, it's a kind of a weird one because banks have both a public facing retail function and a back of the house office function. And, rather than just saying financial services, you're going to regulate retail and you're going to regulate office. And again, the difference is retail invites people into the space all of the time when it's open, and an office typically doesn't. It may have visitors, but it's not as major part of the operation.
Can I jump in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please.
A lot
No,
a lot of thoughts and opinions today. I love this list. And I know you're reorganizing,
Yeah,
and you talked about doing some like little checklists of things for us to think about, such as why do we care? I love matrices. You probably know that already, David. But like what I would really love is a matrix that has this with this beautiful slide that you did, number 11, which is how does a given use physically manifest itself similarly or differently from another, right? Like the idea, like you had categories of needing large delivery, shipping and storage, or visitors coming at different times. It's kind of like I want to mesh that with this because we've grouped it here in some ways by use as opposed to manifestation by these other criteria that you beautifully wrote out, right? And so I kind of want to like do the mind meld, you know what I'm saying?
And at some point you have to.
Do I have to just let that go? Am I making?
No, it's the opposite of a mind meld where you have to kind of begin to disassociate our thoughts about uses versus functions.
Yeah.
Because uses take all kinds of different forms, but when you put all of them into this big vat and you boil them down like you're making maple syrup, you get down to the sugar. And that's the essential elements that distinguish one function from another.
Right.
And that's what those broader categories are.
Yeah, so I'm kind of wanting to like play and see, are the broader categories this or the broader categories? People are coming at all hours of the day.
No, they're retail, professional services,
Okay.
office,
Alright.
those kinds of things. So again, it's not a bank, it's not a broker, a real estate broker, things like that. It's an office.
But it shares the trait that people are coming at all hours of the day.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I
Or
just kinda wanted to
that,
see. I'm-
public.
Okay, thank you. I'll do my own little matrix.
It's all-
So we have, I think,
Thank you.
6
Sorry.
slides, left
Yeah.
and 15 minutes to stay on task.
Okay.
So let's try to let David get through, but write down your questions so that these are important questions, but I want to make sure we actually get through the slides.
So the last one here I'll highlight is, make a clear distinction between commercial recreation and non-commercial recreation, in terms of the use, particularly with regard to indoor and outdoor. I think that recreation category has got things mixed and matched a bit, and there's a real difference when you invite the public in charge of fee for mountain biking or hockey or soccer versus when, you know, it's provided for free.
Yeah.
Or by the community. Okay, so that's the last bit on uses until you see how I've made changes to the use table. So just a high level summary of some of the changes overall that you can expect to see. Oh, so stepping back now of all the conversations we've had over the last 2 months, we've reconfigured the zoning districts in the 3 village centers. For the Riverside Village Code, which is the former character-based zoning, has 1 district, the Riverside Village Center. And as I explained before, this is CD4 and parts of CD3, all combined into 1.
David, I'm going to interrupt you with a question on that. This is coming from the Affordable Housing Committee in their meeting last week, which is a suggestion, maybe not the right venue to do this, but wastewater meeting came out and called for wastewater to go all the way through Valley View and the rest of that area. So is there a reason to exclude that from the CD4, the character-based district? If we're going to have water and sewer there, doesn't it make sense to have that as more of a high density, treated like the rest of the Village Code Center?
So can you just correct, so help me understand which area you're referring to?
To the left of the blue square.
So this area here?
Yeah, a bit of that, and then over down to
Down Raceway?
Raceway,
Down in the raceway?
all of those on Raceway.
Yeah.
Because those are under the wastewater treatment proposal. There is a map which shows wastewater going down Raceway to that end.
Okay. So I think, oops. In this context, I'm not sure that that's necessary because that area is part of the Riverside Village Neighborhood District, which is also mixed use, but less intense mixed use. It's unlikely that you would anticipate that many of these areas up here there would be a lot of non-residential use up here, but you might want to have a lot more residential use, a lot more mixture of residential types that would be served by that wastewater that the village, Riverside Village Neighborhood District would be facilitating. So I think
So I'm thinking more for just the density standards or how many buildings we want to have in there, the ability to put in multifamily units, which is what we're talking about doing in the district right now in the Riverside Village area.
in both of them, actually.
So we would extend out past your blue markers here.
Correct.
All of the rest.
But if I were to zoom in here on the Riverside Village neighborhood, you see, up here and down along Raceway, all of that is part of that village neighborhood, which is going to be at a very similar kind of scales and intensities and densities that you'll see in the village center, just not the same mixture of uses. Not the same degree of non-residential uses, commercial uses, industrial or civic uses in particular, that wouldn't locate that far off of Route 15 or out of the center.
That's right.
It does, and that's why that village neighborhood district is also mixed use and allows for some of those things, just those things that aren't as reliant on traffic, whether it's vehicular or pedestrian traffic, as you get further away from the center of activity. But when we look at these things together, keep that in mind, and I'll keep that in mind, and when we look at how all these things put together and see, have we left something on the table or on the floor that we don't want to?
Yeah, I would add that the bike pathway does intend to go down Raceway. So
Mhm.
conceivably, that end of the town will have cyclists who are thirsty.
Yes,
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Eric, I think if you look at the table, the Excel spreadsheet that they sent, all the residential uses that David and Linda were proposing for the Riverside Village Center are identical to all the residential uses in the Riverside Village neighborhood. So all the housing opportunities look to me like they're identical. The place where it gets different is like a gas station. Like you might want a gas station might be in the village center allowed, but it's actually not a great use of space in the village neighborhood because it would take away from housing. So it's really that the residential components, which are lines, whatever, line like starting at line 18 down through line, including all the senior facilities, they're exactly the same. So there's no difference in residential opportunity between those two from what they have proposed right now. It's the non-residentials that would be different.
and I think, again, I think we want to, kind of keep that in mind is, are there opportunities that are being left out that we want to be sure to incorporate? But this is just kind of where we've left it so far. And you know what the other two, village center districts are in the center and, here in the corners. You've seen this slide before, but I repeat it for, for just posting this later. All of the changes we're proposing to make to the Riverside Village Code in general, and why. And then making changes within the conventional zoning for the Riverside Village District, and then what I refer to more generically as the Jericho Village Centers District, which is both the corners and the center together. Because all the dimensional standards are going to be the same. There may be some uses that you want to treat differently in the center versus the corner because of its lack of activity for a variety of different kind of commercial uses and or scale. So I kind of leave that door open. At the end of the day, there may be no difference, but it's easy enough to say, okay, we have this district, it's called Jericho Village Centers, and it's subdivided into two parts for the purposes of the use table. Sub-districts, if you will. So other changes that would be applicable within the village centers generally, and I mean both Riverside and for the others. And they fit into a couple of categories. Creating opportunities to unlock infill potential on the larger and particularly deeper lots. We've talked about this one a lot, allowing more than one principal dwelling, building and use on a single lot. That's something you can only do through PUD today. You shouldn't have to go through the PUD process to do that. You should be able to say, you can have multiple, you can have three, whatever that is, but you can do that without having to go through PUD, without having to subdivide. At the last meeting, we talked about allowing private driveways to serve up to 4 lots to improve access to those deeper lots. If you can just be able to, again, understanding what's the definition of a driveway in the zoning and allow it to access multiple buildings and multiple lots before it has to turn into a public road or a private road with different set of standards, create some real opportunity. And removing the density limits in general within these village centers. You're regulating the intensity of development based on how you utilize setbacks, how you utilize lot coverage, building sizes, building types, all of those kinds of things. You don't need to include density too, because density is a very challenging thing to apply in a consistent and regular way. So the other aspect
Does
of this,
everybody understand what he just said? It's like, take off the quarter acre zoning requirement
Just let it go.
Because if you already do setbacks and everything else, fit what you can fit.
Fit what you can fit and serve, right?
And-
Ultimately,
yes.
you've got to be able to
What's
serve it with
allowed.
water and wastewater.
Yes, what's allowed, what's feasible, and what can fit.
Yeah.
And then don't worry about how many fit on the space.
Yeah. You know, you don't care how big the lot is, but you care perhaps how wide a lot is. And you want to allow those lots to be narrower, but allow them, they can be wider too. But the wide variation in how deep lots are really throws the density calculations off the map. If every lot were about the same size, then okay, maybe it makes sense. I would argue it doesn't, but so the other part here is make it much easier to do the small stuff, right? Don't make somebody go to the DRB with little projects. So again, we're moving PUD review for the village center districts. Because you can have more than one principal building. Create a pathway for the administrative review and approval of small things like boundary line adjustments. I was really surprised not to see that the zoning administrator couldn't just approve a boundary line adjustment. That's really, really common. I would go so far as then defining major and minor subdivisions and site plans where subdivisions under 5 lots or site plans under a certain kind of size limit, those things can be approved administratively. And if it's bigger than that, then it goes to the DRB. Reducing the minimum driveway width to within 100 feet of a public street. So the width of the driveway or regulating the width of a driveway and ultimately as it becomes a public road is about fire access. If your building's within 100 feet of the street, you've got fire access. As you move beyond 100 feet, then you got to be able to pull the apparatus into the driveway and be able to turn it around. So you need other accommodations, but if you're within 100 feet, they can deploy hose all the way around the building,
If they have
which is
water.
the objective. If they have water, that's a whole nother,
Front
Yeah.
hose.
Yeah.
right? It's all about just the physical access of the apparatus, you know,
Right.
close proximity of the building. If the building's, 300 feet back, well, then you need to get the fire truck up there. But if it's within 100 feet of the road, you don't. The fire truck pulls up on the street, blocks the traffic, they deploy hose. There you
Let me
go.
ask before you move on, just you mentioned that we need some definitions for minor subdivisions and minor site plans. Those are, we don't have definitions right now. Is that something that you'll be offering? Beautiful.
Yeah,
Okay, thank
exactly.
you.
So that's just the nature of, I had originally included a slide that had this laundry list of all of these things like this, which Linda correctly pointed out is kind of overwhelming. Yeah, it is, and
Thank you, Linda.
it's my to-do list of, oh, I can't forget to deal with this because
Yeah.
oh, it's like picking apart or fixing a sweater. You pull on one string, all kinds of other things come unraveled and vice versa. So I need to try to keep track of them.
Okay.
So in subsequent meetings, those site plan review standards, we'll talk about what I would suggest is a distinction between major and minor.
Great.
The architectural design standards, I promised before I go on vacation next week, I'm gonna send Linda and Chris my first crack at what I think here needs to go, needs to maybe be modified, and then let you guys
And I can
give me
send you
feedback.
my thoughts.
That'd be great. If I could get those, like,
Sure.
if you already have them together, I would need them like tomorrow. Otherwise, by the end of this week, I will send you what I have, and then
Okay,
you can jump on top of that.
Can you include me in that too?
I can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then come later in July, beginning of August, you'll see a summary of all the proposed changes leading to that red line version, which is going to be hard to differentiate, but we'll have all of the changes in their place.
Can I make a very small request? When you have your maps, if you could label the colors
Yeah,
That would be great. I
Yeah.
I know that you're just
yeah.
doing things.
I'm just
quick and
doing this
dirty.
quick on the fly. Yeah,
I totally,
absolutely.
but I can get caught up in.
Yeah.
the-
No, and it's even harder
Yeah.
for
Thank
somebody who's
Thank
not
you.
here.
Okay, are there any more planning commission comments or questions? Susan and Wendy, I don't see any hands.
No, I would just say great. That was a huge amount of work that David and Linda have accomplished. I feel like we're making great progress. Thank you very much.
Okay, so if that's all the questions from the planning commission, I invite the public to comment related to the presentation that we just saw. Who would like to go first?
I'll do
Step on up. Please state your name.
Hi, I'm Bill Butler. So just want to clarify, at first I thought you were going to try to control agriculture, but you're not. Agriculture is allowed throughout. Okay, that's what I thought would
For
be.
the state, correct.
And it has been that way. too.
So,
Yeah.
yes, that's what, it's been forever, and I was just making sure. What if a community group wanted to put in a swimming pool, for instance? That's number 5 on your survey, I think, of the public's desires. And so that's a structural challenge for everyone to sort of wrap their heads around, but people want it. So there's that, or another educational building. Mr. Aberdini over at the superintendent would like to make it to another building, and you know, he and I were like sort of ideating about it. Well, wouldn't that be cool to be up on the riverside? He thinks they need something else, and I would talk to him more about what it specifically, but that's another thing that we're not talking about, but it's a real service. So I thought we were going to talk about architecture at Riverside tonight, and I'm feeling like, no, we got a little bit of that. But if you're going to talk about, I'd like to know for sure when you're going to talk about those next subjects that that David was suggesting. One of them was agriculture, and I don't want to miss it. So how do we, just announcing to the community, I think the clarity of this would be important. I think you're doing a great job, and thank you.
Right at 3 minutes. Nice work. Who's next?
Jim Carroll. I think I've said a couple of these things before, but as this project moves forward, I'd like to reiterate that there are, in fact, another village center that is actually developable, that for some reason has been excluded from all of your conversations. It's called the Commercial District. It's actually the center of Jericho. It has far fewer, less desirable things than any of the other three. And it has attributes that could be combined with the other three if they were being planned in the same way at the same time. It's got municipal water at Packard with a 4-inch main that goes all the way down it. But the owners of that property, of which there's about 5, most of them are my age, and they've offered irrevocable offers of dedication to create a loop road, which is an incredible piece of infrastructure that will be an enormous project to do in other places. And it's got septic capacity there, and it has adjacent properties. So I think as you look at this project, you're spending all this time on all this theoretical, and I'm suggesting to you after almost 50 years here that your boundaries of these areas are wrong. And so your conversations with respect to depth of the lot, what the potentials are, is, you know, you're going around in circles. I use an analogy of putting the front bumper of my truck up against a concrete bunker filled with rock, putting grease under the wheels, and then running it until there's no gas left in the tank. Wore out the tires, burned all the fuel, but I didn't get anything done. So I think you should really look at, and when you get into these tables of uses, one of the most important things is transparency and defining impact. If a person is buying a property and it's very clear before their deed can get recorded that they have to sign that they understand that their neighbor might do A, B, C, and D in this zone. This highly restrictive zoning is an enormous burden of building anything. 28% is the absolute minimum burn of any development dollar on all of this wasted energy because it's not clear, it's not transparent, and then because people didn't know when they bought what it was that they were going to be adjacent to. And you're a realtor, so I'll be polite, but the bottom line is transactionalists are not responsible for a full disclosure. And most of the people who are buying real estate, and I've only done it for 50 years, don't have a clue. So they look for good independent advisors that are not compensated out of the transaction, and there's not many of those around. So the town's function should really be saying, you can't come in here and file a transfer tax return and a deed without making sure that these people understand what's going to happen. I can see you going,
Over by half.
okay.
I want to make sure that we let everyone else who is attending have their time before we run out of time.
Oh, just one shot. The Rivers' property is not being discussed. You're talking about 125 acres of highly desirable land in the central area adjacent to Jericho Center that has been ignored since the gift was brought to the table. And it's adjacent to the firing range, and it's got all types of stuff. MMU and the other school districts and the range offers an enormous opportunity of joint venture, but the functionality that's necessary to actually accomplish anything in Jericho is administrative. You need to form a fire district.
You're
So that
at
you've got-
5 minutes. Thank
All right,
you.
we can get into that argument. By the way, I checked. I think you're wrong.
Who else would like to use their time today? Please step forward.
I'm Greg Tatro. I own part of the stuff you're talking about here, I guess. So we tried to permit a building next to the Union Bank, and the biggest thing that we ran into was the codes that we couldn't meet the codes from the state of Vermont, the way things were way the zoning wanted us to build, such as high ceilings, too much glazing. We would have had to build another wall inside of a wall to meet the state's specs for, I don't know if it's heating or, I can't remember exactly what it was, but Bill might know. It's,
Yeah, so the glazing energy efficiency.
and energy efficiency, yeah. So I hope you take a good look at that, because if you're talking about affordable housing and middle income housing, the way this zoning is, you can't do it. So that's all I gotta say, and I'm glad you guys are looking at this. I think that's a great thing, a great start, and wish you the best of luck going forward. And I'm glad to hear you're trying to make it more appealing to do something here, because it is a great little town that could use some more housing and children and people. So thanks for taking a look at that.
Thank you very much. Bernard, no?
Yeah. Bill Gardner, I had a chance to meet with Chris last week or 2 weeks ago now and go over some of the faults I was finding in the architectural design standards as part of Riverside back when I was working with Greg on the building we were trying to do then, and just the complexity of the terms, and it was just the most confusing thing I'd ever tried to work under, and I've only been doing it for 44 years, so, and Chris and I think in the process of going through it, we found that there were just a lot of the architectural standards that were just head scratchers, why is this in here? It was just, it made no sense. So I would very much like to see things eased up or just made clear about what it was that designing a building is hard enough when you're trying to fit your client's needs, the state's requirements for life safety and things, and to add this level of complexity on top of all that was more difficult than all the rest of it combined. It's just wrong. Yes. I'll let it go at that.
Thank you very much. Glenn? All set? Okay, anybody on video? Who wants to speak? No? Okay. Those are great comments. That's very helpful feedback.
Is it worth noting that we are examining the architectural standards, and David has been working on that we are aware of what we inherited on those architectural standards and the onerous nature of them. So that is high on the list to be fixed.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So that concludes the public comment portion. So now we're going to move on to other PC business. Next on the agenda, Planning Commission organizing and transition planning. Is that your topic?
Okay, I can speak to it, and Susan, I hope will help me out, because she and I had a long phone call last week, kind of talking about some thoughts.
We did.
So,
I just wanted to interject or maybe start this segment with a congratulations to Linda for her new role, where she's going to be the assistant town administrator for Jericho. I told her the other day that we were sorry to see her go, but happy she'll be staying in Jericho, and also that I think she's set us up quite well by supporting us through the process of developing and adopting a new town plan. And she's going to continue working with us through this bylaw process. And she was successful in getting grants that the town has been trying to get for years and years. And so we really want to say thank you to you, Linda, and congratulations. And we're glad that you're only going like basically next door, and that you'll still be working with us and working with the town.
thank you.
Yeah.
You did a lot in the short amount of time.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it's been a little over a year. It's
Yes.
pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yes.
Impressive.
And
Yeah.
right. So Linda and I did go through some projects, and actually I probably can't stay for the rest of the conversation. So I was wondering, Linda, are you just able to go through the list that you and I went through?
Yes, that's
Or
what
did
I
you
have
want-
here.
Okay. And can you do it, or did you want me to do it?
I just have your email that I'm gonna read.
Okay.
So
Because that
Up
would
to
be
you.
that would be perfect. And then if there are other like follow-up questions about that after, I'm around, I'm available. I can follow up with Linda, or I can follow up with anybody else. Okay.
great. Yeah.
Okay. So I am going to bid farewell.
Thank you, Susan. Bye, Susan.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Sarah, for running the meeting. All right. Good night.
Okay. So the good news is I'm still going to work on the bylaw modernization project, and we still have David on the hook for some more meetings coming up. So, we do have some things already on the schedule and the queue, and we're not going to disrupt the flow of everything we've been doing. So I feel like we're on a train and we're going somewhere, and we're not going to get off. We're not going to stop. So that said, the next date we have David is July 16th. And we're gonna stick to that, keep that meeting on the calendar. Susan and I talked about potentially well, I did already invite SJ to give some feedback from the Affordable Housing Committee. I haven't heard back from her to confirm whether she's going to do that. But if she is available, we wanted to keep like 10 to 15 minutes in that meeting to hear that feedback. Susan was saying that some folks are not available July 2nd, which would be our next meeting, and was proposing to cancel that meeting and give us all a little breather.
I second.
Second, okay. So if that sounds good, we'll cancel the July 2nd meeting. And then that means the next meeting will be the July 16th meeting where we'll have David back again. So between now and then, Susan and I are going to talk about some of these other items. We're trying to identify things that you guys can continue to work on when there are meeting slots available that don't require a lot of assistance. So things you guys can, do independently, since you're going to have to kind of be developing your own agendas and preparing your own packets and stuff. I can still be available to post agendas if I receive them by Friday at noon. And if I can't, then the deadline technically for posting is Sunday. So if you miss me on Friday, maybe one of you would be able to do it over the weekend or something. So let's see, the job is posted on the website. It's been, there's an ad in 7 days. I've sent it to the American Planners Association website for New England. Our intention, our hope is that we'll be able to find somebody very quickly, more quickly than it took between Catherine Sonic leaving and me coming on board. So, I mean, the goal I think would be by the fall to have somebody in here. So, if we can achieve that, there won't be too much of a gap. So some of the other projects that Susan and I talked about that you guys could work on. Let's see. So we had capital planning, and she and I talked about seeking direction from the select board to get confirmation that that's something that would be welcomed before proceeding with that, which I think is a smart thing to do. She said, let's see, after July 1st, she was thinking we could, or you all could invite the select board to review the red line early, so they're not rushed in the fall to approve, which we won't have the red line by July 1st. So maybe she meant August 1st. Circle back to her.
I like the concept.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
In theory, yes.
In theory. So the official map is also still in the queue. That's something that the funding is in place for, that we thought would be a good project for the new planner to start. So that was something that is on the radar. We want you to know we haven't forgotten about it. That one probably wouldn't get worked on until we get a new planner in place. Another thing that was in the queue that could be done without support would be a joint meeting between the Affordable Housing Committee, the Planning Commission, and the Energy Task Force. So that's something I think you guys would be able to coordinate yourselves and figure out when that would work to do that. Then other things in the queue for the longer term, other zoning changes, looking at the village district, the low density residential district in the area around the MMU high school. Susan hasn't, we talked about, that could be something that could start in January, right after we wrap up. Ideally, the select board will be wrapping up this round of zoning updates, and then that could be sort of like the next thing in the queue to start working on. And then another thing that you guys could have as an agenda item would be planning for farmers market table. And the date for that is August 29th. So that could be something on an agenda in August. So when I talked to Susan, she and I were thinking that in the next week and a half, while I'm still in the planner role, she and I would pick from those many items and try to schedule them out as much as we can into meeting slots and meeting dates. Is there anything that I didn't say that's on your radar that?
Just that, wasn't there an intern?
Yeah. There is.
For the wastewater.
Yes,
Outreach.
there isn't one yet.
Oh, okay, but
But-
theoretically,
Theoretically, yes, I can include that in the longer term.
Thought we had one starting already.
Wendy hasn't, Wendy?
Thank you, Sabina. I'm curious about the timeline for the actual search. You know, I realize that it's tentative because if you don't have a good pool of candidates, you're gonna probably want to extend the timeline for the search. But when is the desired timeline for interviews, the role of the planning commission as a part of the search committee, just sort of the general process?
So the initial date on the job ad to start reviewing applications is July 1st. So hoping to get some good candidates in before then. And that review of candidates will be internal, just town staff, kind of looking through the resumes and identifying which ones seem viable and doing the initial outreach to kind of feel them out before bringing in any other folks. And Paul and I haven't really formalized the next step beyond that yet. That's going to be a conversation probably for next week. But there will be a role for at least Susan, if not another member or two of the planning commission. We're not going to do interviews with the whole planning commission the way that was done when I was hired. Because that's just it was too time consuming, and we want to be as efficient as possible. So stay tuned for more details on exactly what we come up with for the process, but it won't be it won't be interviews with the full planning commission.
I have mixed feelings. I appreciate efficiency. I really do appreciate efficiency, but I also like to have input, I guess, because of the important role that that you play and that the incumbent would play in supporting us. And I'm
Okay.
curious how other people feel.
I share that, Wendy, that I think we as the planning commission have a role to play in how we work together as a team, because this is a team. So we want to be nice to have some input into it as opposed to having something imposed upon us to have to work with.
Okay, I'll take that into consideration when we
Yeah.
talk about the process.
I see both sides, which is to say, it's not efficient for a candidate, it's a lot to ask of a candidate. I do see the advantage of having a candidate see a planning commission meeting in process, if that's gonna be an important part of their job, is to facilitate that meeting, and seeing the process of how it runs could be educational. But also, to be clear, this is gonna be someone's job and we are volunteers. So although we are very, very important partners, we are not employees, and we, in theory, could have a much more fluid participation moving forward than someone who's taking a job. It's a different commitment. Not saying we don't all take it very seriously, because the average tenure of this group is quite long.
I would definitely agree I would encourage them to want to see us in.
Sure, sure, but they can also watch on video or what, I know
Yeah,
that's not
yeah.
the same, but
Yeah.
candidates may not be able to be in person. And that's also something, right? So
I wouldn't
it's,
want to make it a deterrent.
yeah,
If you have somebody really good.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And so, just to move back to the intern.
Yeah,
Do
oh,
we need
yes.
to recruit someone, or do we not need to recruit someone, and who is said recruiter?
Well, right now I'm still waiting for the contract documents from the UVM, so that's taken longer. Since this whole Leahy Institute is a brand new
Yeah.
institute, they are figuring things out as they go.
Okay.
So it's not going as quickly as I thought it might.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we might be looking at a pool that are available in the fall as opposed to over the summer.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I do think in a recent conversation I had with them about said intern, they suggested that the fall would bring a larger pool of applicants because their students will be back Versus doing in the summer, I guess, a lot of people are go back home or whatever, have other things that they're doing. So they said, okay, well, fall, if we did it in the fall, that'd be great. We'll have a lot of students back here on campus to pick from.
Multiple.
And that's for wastewater, right?
Yeah.
So what is the current status of that whole thing? Where is the select board in their determinations? You know that? I mean, I didn't look at their next agenda, so I don't know if it's on there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that John Ashley, the engineer, presented at a select board meeting earlier this month.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if they identified any follow-up meetings with him or next steps.
Because what would, if nothing is resolved by then, or, I mean, things would need to be resolved more fully, at least in a direction, right? Before the intern can do anything, or am I not, is that not, is that not true?
I think that the intern could still work on developing outreach materials about the importance of wastewater, even if we're still in a phase of not,
Okay.
not having a project that's
To apply it
specifically
to.
identified yet.
Okay, sure.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay.
That's pretty much all I wanted to touch base on.
Well, that feels like a lot. So
Yeah,
I don't want to minimize it.
yeah, and I mean, I will still be around, so, it's,
Yes.
it's not like I'm,
No, we still have
Moving out of
safety
state.
blanket. We
Yes.
still have our Linda.
yes, and I'm still gonna be here working with you all and David.
Yeah, that's great.
On the bylaw
Yes, thank
modernization
you.
grant, until we get a new planner. So if you know anyone,
I'm gonna take that and put it on my LinkedIn.
I sent it to my planner friend in New Jersey.
okay.
Nice, try to entice them, come north.
Does VAPTA do any posting and recruiting?
I don't know if VAPTA does. I know Paula submitted the posting to VLCT, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Okay,
I'll look
great.
into VAPTA. She-
doesn't really do that.
Yeah, I don't, but I think she also did send the job posting to Chittenden County Regional Planning, because they're also recruiting for a planner right now, so maybe there could be some sharing of applicant pool potentially, if, or they could, or maybe they could share the posting that we have
Right.
with applicants that don't move along in their process.
Mm.
Very good. Okay, all right, yeah, we've got a couple more minutes. Okay. Does anyone have any liaison updates? I have a brief liaison update. There was a DRB meeting last week. The applicant did say, I want to put more buildings in this space that are greater than 2 units. And I encourage you to read the decision of that DRB meeting. It is all online. Thank you. So think about that. And it's illustrative of where we have potential to keep improving things. Our intentions when we did PUD updates and other updates were not fully realized. So it's an iterative process.
Yep.
And it's all online for you to read.
I'm going to the bike walk summit on Thursday. And is anyone going to the community development meeting next week on Tuesday? No, okay, just wondering.
Where's
Maybe I
that?
should, let's tell me more.
Yeah.
That one
I've
was
seen it.
about economic growth.
Okay.
And I think that one is in Hardwick. I can send out the advertisement again. If I can find it.
I probably can go. But please tell us. Are you planning to go?
I would like to go. I don't think I have a ticket just yet, but I will let you know if I do.
Okay, well, if you go, I'm excited to hear what.
The keynote
Mhm.
speaker is Dominic from St. Albans, so
Nice.
Popular
I
guy,
feel like there's gonna be a lot of good information.
like that's worth it, worth the admission.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm jealous. Okay, anyone else? No, hearing none, we will move on to other business. What other business do we have?
I have one thing that I just remembered
Please.
about. The legislature overrode the veto of the Act 250 bill.
Yep.
So, that's I wanted to update you because I had sent you the notice that he had vetoed it, so. There's still a lot of detail that we're gonna need to learn more
It won't
about.
help us yet.
Right, it's not gonna have a giant immediate impact
could.
as I have read it today. But
Right.
it has
But
the
it's
potential,
the
like we had
right
wastewater,
We have
Yes.
waste-
it has the potential.
Yes.
So there is some intriguing language about exemptions from Act 250 in village centers
Mhm.
where there's water or sewer or suitable soils,
Mhm. Yes,
which
it's
is
subjective, it's
a gray term. Like, I don't know what to make of that. So I
Yeah.
think we need to wait for some interpretations from either
Yeah.
the Vermont League of Cities and Towns or state agencies, and they typically do put out some communications after bills like this get passed. But that was a curiosity in my mind, like,
Mhm.
what does this mean?
yes.
Or suitable soils.
Yeah, I think, it's not perfect, but I think that's a great step. That's my personal opinion. It's better than no change.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, any other business? No, wrap up and planning for next meetings. We just talked about the next two meetings. July 2nd, we will not have a meeting. July 16th, we will have a meeting
We'll have
with
David.
David again. And that will be awesome. Okay. Any other planning for next meeting? Nope. All right. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I will motion to adjourn.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Alright.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, unanimous. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.